Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lights and journey into one of the most primal and persistent fears throughout human history, the chilling reality of damnation and eternal curses. This isn't about a fleeting moment of bad luck or a temporary setback. Oh no, we're talking about a punishment that stretches beyond death. A condemnation that could blight your very soul or poison your lineage for generations. Imagine, if you will, living in a world where you truly believed that your actions, or the actions of your ancestors, could condemn you to an eternity of torment? Or that a whispered word could invoke a spiritual malignancy that clung to you like a shroud? You can almost feel the cold dread of such a belief, the desperate prayers, and the profound, crushing weight of inescapable doom. This isn't a comfortable topic, and for good reason. For countless civilizations, the fear of damnation, of a curse from a deity or a powerful sorcerer, was a very real, very tangible threat. It shaped their laws, their rituals, their daily behavior, and their understanding of justice. You probably wouldn't survive a single night if you truly believed you were eternally damned in some of these historical contexts. The psychological toll, the sheer terror of inescapable suffering, would be utterly overwhelming. This was a fate far worse than any earthly execution, because it reached into the very fabric of your immortal being. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It truly helps this little corner of the internet grow, and it lets me know these sleepy historical deep dives are finding their audience. And if you're feeling up to it, drop a comment below and let me know where you're listening from tonight, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in an ancient land, perhaps walking through the ruins of a forgotten temple, or tracing the dust of a bustling marketplace from millennia past. The air is thick with the scent of incense, sacrifice, and the murmur of prayers. Here, amidst the daily rhythms of life, you quickly grasp a universal truth that permeated every ancient society: the profound, inherent fear of damnation and curses. This isn't just a modern concept of bad luck. It's a deep-seated, often terrifying belief in supernatural punishment, extending its reach far beyond mortal life. This fundamental dread forms the very first of our echoes of eternal dread. From the earliest recorded civilizations, humans have grappled with the concept of justice, not just in this life, but in the hereafter. What happens to the wicked, to those who betray, murder, or desecrate sacred things? The answer, across a vast spectrum of cultures, was often a form of damnation, a post-mortem punishment, a spiritual suffering that could last for eternity. This wasn't merely a theological construct. It was a psychological and social anchor, shaping morality and behavior in ways we can barely comprehend today. Consider ancient Egypt, where the fear of damnation was intensely visual and visceral. You believed that after death, your heart would be weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. If your heart was heavy with sin, it would be devoured by Ammit, the devourer of the dead, a terrifying creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. This wasn't just losing your soul, it was total annihilation, a terrifying erasure from existence, meaning you would never reach the peaceful afterlife in the field of reeds. Imagine the pervasive fear that shaped every moral choice, every plea to the gods, in the hope of avoiding such a dreadful fate. Similarly, in ancient Mesopotamia, the afterlife for most was a gloomy, dusty underworld, but for the truly wicked, it was a place of eternal hunger and thirst, a perpetual torment. In Greek mythology, those who committed egregious sins against the gods, like Sisyphus or Tantalus, were condemned to eternal punishments in Tartarus, their suffering unending and exquisitely tailored to their specific transgressions. These weren't fleeting misfortunes. They were punishments stretching into infinity, a brutal concept designed to instill absolute terror and compel obedience, beyond divine damnation. There was the equally terrifying fear of curses. A curse was not a random act of misfortune, it was a deliberate invocation of malevolent, supernatural power, aimed at bringing harm, ruin, or suffering upon an individual, a family, or even an entire lineage. And what made curses so chilling was their perceived persistence. They could cling to you like a shadow, blighting your health, destroying your wealth, or poisoning your relationships. And if you believed in them, they could truly break you psychologically. The act of cursing was often deeply ritualistic. In ancient Rome, for instance, curse tablets depictions were common. You would inscribe a name, often with a plea to underworld deities, onto a lead tablet, then roll or fold it and bury it in a grave or a sacred well, intending to bind your enemy to suffering, or to hinder their actions. Imagine finding such a small, unassuming piece of lead, knowing the immense hatred and malevolent intent it carried. These were not just symbolic acts. They were believed to be potent, magical weapons. Scholars generally agree that the belief in curses and divine damnation served powerful social functions in ancient societies, acting as a form of moral enforcement and a deterrent against antisocial behavior. Even if the direct mechanisms were supernatural, this highlights their practical, as well as spiritual, importance, a particularly disturbing, yet universal detail is the fear of generational curses, the idea that the sins of the father could be visited upon the children, or that a curse could blight an entire bloodline for generations, was a terrifying concept. This meant that even if you lived a righteous life, you could be suffering the consequences of a distant ancestor's transgression, a fate over which you had no control. This contributed to a profound sense of fatalism and a desperate desire to cleanse one's lineage. The very language of curses often involved invoking powerful deities or demonic forces. To be cursed by the gods, or by someone wielding divine power, was to be marked by a cosmic malevolence. Separated from divine favor and condemned to suffer. This elevated the act of cursing from mere human spite to a terrifying spiritual weapon. You can almost feel the weight of this pervasive belief. If someone in your ancient village fell ill mysteriously, or their crops repeatedly failed, or their family was plagued by tragedy, the whispers would inevitably turn to curses. Was it divine punishment? Was someone wielding dark magic against them? The uncertainty itself was a form of torment, driving people to seek purifications, counterspells, or desperate appeals to higher powers. So, as you step back from this ancient world, saturated with spiritual belief and pervasive fear, you begin to grasp the profound, brutal history of damnation and eternal curses. These weren't mere abstract concepts. They were terrifying realities that shaped lives, dictated behavior, and held entire societies in their fearsome grip, leaving a chilling echo of eternal dread that still resonates in our collective consciousness. You've explored the universal fear of damnation and curses, those chilling echoes of eternal dread that permeated ancient societies. Now, let's narrow our focus and delve into how early belief systems conceptualized these fears, specifically looking at divine wrath unleashed. This is about the terrifying idea that deities, angered by human transgression, could mete out punishments that were not just earthly misfortunes, but profound, often eternal, condemnations, blighting lives and souls with a terrifying supernatural power. Imagine a world where polytheistic religions reigned, where a pantheon of gods and goddesses, each with their own temperament, domains, and often volatile personalities, governed the cosmos. These deities were not always benevolent. They demanded respect, offerings, and strict adherence to their divine laws. To offend them, to commit blasphemy, sacrilege, or to break sacred vows, was to invite a retribution far more devastating than any human punishment. Their divine wrath was not merely a temper tantrum, it was a cosmic force, capable of reshaping destinies and condemning souls. Consider the pantheon of ancient Greek and Roman gods. Zeus Jupiter could hurl thunderbolts, Apollo could send plagues, and Hades Pluto could doom souls to Tartarus. You lived in constant awareness of their potential displeasure, to break an oath sworn by the gods, to disrespect a sacred site, or to display hubris, excessive pride, was to invite their terrible vengeance. This wasn't just a threat of bad luck, it was a threat of profound, inescapable suffering. Often with a spiritual dimension that extended beyond death. Think of the story of Laocoon, the Trojan priest who warned against the Trojan horse. He and his sons were famously strangled by sea serpents, a punishment sent by the gods Poseidon or Athena, depending on the version for his impiety or for trying to thwart divine will. This wasn't just a tragic death, it was a brutal demonstration of divine wrath unleashed, a public spectacle designed to instill terror and submission in the hearts of mortals. You would have looked upon such a scene, or heard tales of it, and felt a profound, chilling fear of angering the heavens. Then there's the monotheistic concept of a single, all-powerful God whose justice was absolute. In ancient Judaism and later in Christianity, transgression against God's laws could lead to profound spiritual condemnation. The concept of Gehenna in Jewish tradition, or hell in Christian theology, became the ultimate destination for the damned. This wasn't just a place of punishment, it was a state of eternal separation from God, a torment that could involve fire, gnashing of teeth, and unimaginable suffering, lasting forever. Imagine the psychological weight of this belief, where every sin, every transgression, carried the potential for an eternity of agony. This was not a vague threat. Religious texts and sermons vividly described the horrors awaiting the damned. Artists depicted terrifying scenes of the underworld, with demons tormenting souls in agonizing detail. These images were designed to instill profound fear, to compel adherence to divine law, and to reinforce the absolute power of the deity. You literally believed that your soul could be cast into an inferno for eternity, and that belief shaped every moral choice you made. Scholars of comparative religion often highlight both the universal patterns of divine retribution across cultures, g.g., punishment for impiety, moral transgression, and the specific cultural variations in the conceptualization and portrayal of these punishments, e.g., annihilation versus eternal suffering. Specific types of torment. This illustrates the diverse ways cultures grapple with ultimate justice. A particularly disturbing detail of divine curses was their perceived hereditary nature. In many ancient belief systems, divine wrath could extend beyond the individual transgressor, blighting their entire lineage for generations. The sins of the father could literally be visited upon the children, leading to generations of misfortune, illness, or early death. This concept, often found in ancient Greek tragedies and some biblical narratives, created a profound sense of inherited guilt and inescapable doom. A terrifying thought that your very existence could be cursed through no fault of your own. Think of the story of the House of Atreus in Greek mythology, cursed for generations due to the heinous crimes of its ancestors, experiencing an endless cycle of murder, betrayal, and suffering. This wasn't just bad luck, it was a relentless, divine curse. A profound example of divine wrath unleashed upon a bloodline. Such narratives served as powerful moral lessons, warning against hubris and emphasizing the long-term consequences of defying the gods. The rituals used to appeal to angry deities or to avert their wrath were often elaborate and terrifying. Sacrifices, sometimes human, though often animal, were offered in desperate attempts to appease divine anger. Priests would perform complex ceremonies, chanting ancient words, trying to cajole or compel the gods to withdraw their curses. The very desperation of these rituals underscores the profound fear of facing the unbounded wrath of the heavens. You might hear whispers in ancient marketplaces, or see fear in the eyes of villagers when an unexplained epidemic struck, or a drought withered their crops. Was it merely natural disaster? Or was it a sign of divine wrath unleashed this uncertainty? This constant possibility of supernatural punishment infused every aspect of life with a profound spiritual anxiety. It was a world where every misfortune could be interpreted as a sign of heavenly displeasure, driving people to constant piety and fear. So, as you step back from these ancient concepts of divine retribution, you grasp the immense, chilling power of damnation and eternal curses when wielded by the gods. It was a terrifying, all-encompassing force that dictated morality, shaped societies, and instilled a profound, persistent fear for one's soul and lineage. A fear that has echoed through the millennia. A truly brutal history of inescapable supernatural punishment. You've explored the terrifying notion of divine wrath unleashed, concepts of damnation and curses meted out by angry deities. But curses weren't just the purview of the gods. Now, let's delve into an equally chilling aspect of mortal curses. Earthly spite. This is about the dark, often desperate, history of human-made curses, whispered by the wronged, invoked by the magically inclined, and believed to wield immense, destructive power in the everyday lives of ancient peoples. Imagine a world where personal vendettas could fester, where injustice might go unpunished by earthly laws, and where the only recourse for the powerless was to appeal to unseen forces. This is the breeding ground for mortal curses. These weren't polite disagreements, they were bitter, malevolent invocations, born of intense hatred, jealousy, or a profound sense of grievance, aimed at bringing ruin, suffering, or even death upon an enemy. The belief in their efficacy was so strong that they could, and often did, exert a terrifying psychological impact on their targets. Consider the prevalence of curse tablets depictions in ancient Greece and Rome. As we briefly touched on earlier, you'd go to a professional curse maker, a person often on the fringes of society, possessing specialized knowledge of magical rituals. For a fee, they would inscribe a lead tablet achieve, malleable metal with your enemy's name and a detailed plea to chthonic underworld deities or malevolent spirits. The requests were often chillingly specific, blinding an opponent in a lawsuit, crippling a rival in business, rendering a lover impotent, or causing general misfortune and illness. Imagine the raw, festering hatred that fueled such a request. These tablets weren't just written, they were often pierced with nails, symbolically binding the victim to the curse, and then deposited in places believed to be conduits to the underworld graves, especially those of the recently dead or violently deceased, whose spirits were considered restless and receptive to appeals. Sacred wells, springs, or even buried under the thresholds of homes. The very act of burying the curse was meant to ensure its dark energy penetrated the earth and reached the infernal deities. You could almost feel the cold, dark energy emanating from such a hidden, buried relic of pure malice. The power of a mortal curse wasn't just in the ritual, it was in the belief. If you knew someone had cursed you, or if you suspected it, every misfortune that befell you, a sudden illness, a crop failure, a business setback, a quarrel with a loved one, could be attributed to the curse. This intense psychological pressure could literally manifest as physical symptoms. A form of psychosomatic illness, the constant fear, the gnawing anxiety, could erode your well-being, proving the curse's effectiveness through sheer terror. It's like living under a dark cloud that only you can see, but which impacts every facet of your life. Scholars of ancient magic and religion often debate the true intent behind historical curse tablets. Were they primarily psychological weapons, literal magical invocations, or a combination of both? The lack of definitive accounts from the perspective of the cursor or cursed leaves much room for academic interpretation. But the widespread practice points to a genuine belief in their power, a particularly disturbing, yet widespread detail was the use of sympathetic magic in curses. This involved using a piece of the victim's hair, fingernail clippings, a fragment of their clothing, or even a wax effigy, a small doll representing them, to target the curse. Any harm inflicted upon the effigy, or the object, was believed to directly affect the victim. Imagine finding a small, distorted wax figure with pins stuck into it, knowing it was made to cause you suffering. This direct, tangible connection made the curse feel incredibly personal and terrifyingly real. Then there's the power of the spoken curse. In many cultures, the words of certain individuals, witches, shamans, or even a deeply wronged person in a moment of intense anger were believed to carry immense power. A curse might be whispered, chanted, or publicly proclaimed, particularly if it was meant to shame or ostracize. Imagine a wronged individual publicly calling down ruin upon their enemy, invoking divine or ancestral spirits to witness and enact their vengeance. The weight of community belief and the fear of supernatural retribution could give these spoken words incredible power. The concept of the evil eye, prevalent in many Mediterranean and Middle Eastern cultures, is a milder, but still insidious, form of mortal curse. It's the belief that a malicious glance, often born of envy, can bring misfortune, illness, or even death upon its unwitting target. While less dramatic than a defixio, the constant fear of attracting the evil eye permeated daily life, leading to protective amulets, gestures, and rituals to ward off its subtle, unseen malice. It's a constant, low-level anxiety that influenced social interactions. The history of mortal curses also includes instances where powerful individuals, like kings or religious leaders outside of the formal church anathemas we discussed previously, would issue personal curses against their enemies or those who betrayed them. These often carried immense weight due to the cursor's earthly power and perceived connection to the divine. Imagine a dying king, with his last breath, cursing the line of his treacherous successor, a chilling scene straight out of a tragic play, yet believed to have very real consequences. The attempts to protect oneself from curses, or to lift them, also underscore their pervasive nature. People would employ counter-charms, purification rituals, protective amulets, or seek the help of other magic practitioners to undo the malicious work of a curse. This constant struggle against unseen, malevolent forces was a significant part of daily life for many ancient peoples. So, as you step back from the dark realm of mortal curses, earthly spite, you recognize that the fear of damnation wasn't just about distant gods. It was also about the immediate, chilling reality of human malice, channeled through rituals and fueled by powerful belief, capable of blighting lives and instilling a profound, persistent dread in the hearts of its victims. These were the terrifying, man-made shadows that stretched across the ancient world. You've explored the chilling reality of human-made curses, born from earthly spite. Now, let's pivot to the towering institution that wielded the most profound spiritual condemnation in the Western world, for centuries the Church's spiritual scourge. We're going to delve into the formidable power of religious anathema and spiritual damnation, understanding how institutions, particularly the medieval Christian Church, weaponized the fear of eternal punishment to exert unparalleled control over individuals and even entire societies. Imagine yourself into medieval Europe, a world where the church was not just a religion, but the very fabric of society. As we've explored before, its teachings dictated your morality, Its sacraments guided your life, and its promise of heaven or threat of hell shaped your every waking moment in this environment. The ultimate weapon was not a sword or an army, but the power to condemn a soul, to cast an individual or a group out of God's grace and into what was believed to be an eternity of torment. This was the spiritual scourge, wielded by popes and bishops with terrifying authority. The most potent form of this spiritual scourge was anathema, while often used interchangeably with excommunication. Anathema was the most severe form of excommunication, reserved for grave offenses like heresy or schism. It was a formal, public, and often terrifying declaration that an individual was cursed by God, utterly cut off from the body of Christ, and condemned to eternal damnation. Imagine a bishop, robed in black, standing before a gathered congregation, perhaps in a darkened church, solemnly reading the anathema. The very air would crackle with dread. The ritual itself was often designed to be viscerally impactful, as we briefly touched upon. The infamous bells, book, and candle ceremony, though perhaps exaggerated in some popular depictions, captures the essence. The bells would toll mournfully, as if for a funeral, then fall silent. A book. Often the Bible would be closed sharply, symbolizing the closing of the gates of heaven. Candles, symbolizing the light of the individual's soul or the grace of God, would be extinguished one by one, then often hurled to the ground, a chilling representation of the soul being cast into eternal darkness. You would literally see your spiritual light snuffed out before your very eyes. The psychological impact of such a condemnation was immense. For a medieval person, to be declared anathema meant that God himself had turned his back on you. Every misfortune that followed, every illness, every failure, would be interpreted as a sign of divine disfavor, confirming your cursed status. The constant, gnawing fear of eternal hellfire would be an unbearable burden, consuming your thoughts, poisoning your waking hours, and haunting your dreams. It was a mental and spiritual torture far beyond any physical punishment. Historians and theologians often debate the true extent to which the bells, book and candle ritual was a standardized formal rite versus a more folkloric or exaggerated depiction of anathema, though its symbolic power and perceived terror were undoubtedly real for the populace. This reflects the interplay between formal church doctrine and popular understanding. Beyond the individual, the church also wielded the interdict, a form of spiritual damnation applied to entire communities or kingdoms. Imagine a land suddenly plunged into spiritual darkness. No baptisms for newborns, no masses, no marriages in consecrated ground, and, crucially, no Christian burials. The dead would lie unhallowed, their souls believed to be in torment. This collective damnation was designed to break the will of defiant rulers by turning their devout populace against them. The spiritual suffering of the many became a weapon against the few. The concept of heresy was central to the church's spiritual scourge. To hold beliefs contrary to church doctrine was not just an intellectual disagreement, it was a mortal sin, a direct challenge to God's truth, and an offense punishable by spiritual damnation. Heretics were not just excommunicated, they were often handed over to secular authorities for physical punishment. Sometimes execution, ensuring their earthly demise paralleled their spiritual condemnation. The church saw itself as protecting the eternal souls of its flock, and heresy was the ultimate threat to those souls, a particularly disturbing, yet common. Detail was the church's use of religious imagery to instill fear of damnation. Frescoes and stained glass windows in churches vividly depicted the horrors of hell demons torturing the damned. Lakes of fire, grotesque monsters devouring souls. These visual sermons were constant reminders of the terrifying fate awaiting those who strayed from the path of righteousness or incurred the church's wrath. You couldn't escape the imagery, it was everywhere, reinforcing the brutal reality of damnation. The effectiveness of this spiritual scourge lay in its comprehensive nature. It targeted not just your soul, but your social standing, your legal rights, your family's future, and even your resting place after death. It leveraged the deepest human fears of abandonment, pain, and eternal suffering, making defiance against the church a prospect too terrifying for most to contemplate. So, as you step back from this powerful historical reality, you begin to grasp the formidable nature of the church's spiritual scourge. It was a system of profound control, wielding the very concept of damnation and eternal curses as its ultimate weapon, shaping societies and terrifying individuals into submission through the brutal power of spiritual condemnation. You've immersed yourself in the chilling power of the church's spiritual scourge. Understanding how religious damnation could blight a soul? Now, let's explore an equally terrifying and insidious aspect of curses: the belief in cursed objects. Blighted lives. This is about the ancient, pervasive dread that inanimate items, a piece of jewelry, a relic, a seemingly harmless artifact, could be imbued with malevolent, supernatural power, bringing misfortune, illness, or even death to anyone who possessed them, forever blighting their existence. Imagine walking through an ancient marketplace. Amidst the bustling stalls and vibrant colors, you might glimpse a peculiar object, an intricately carved idol with unsettling eyes, a strangely shaped piece of jewelry, or a weathered scroll covered in unfamiliar symbols. Most would pass by, but for some, a chilling thought might arise. Is it cursed? This wasn't just idle superstition. The belief that objects could be imbued with powerful, often negative, spiritual energy was deeply ingrained in many ancient cultures. From the earliest civilizations to the medieval Europe and beyond, a cursed object was not merely unlucky. It was believed to be an active conduit for malevolence. This malevolence could stem from various sources: a powerful sorcerer's deliberate enchantment, the lingering resentment of a wronged spirit, or even the inherent badness of the materials or events associated with its creation. Once cursed, the object would become a silent carrier of ill fortune, poisoning the lives of its owners with relentless misfortune. Consider the tales of ancient Egyptian tombs and the curse of the pharaohs. While largely a modern sensationalism, it taps into ancient beliefs. For instance, some artifacts from tombs were believed to be protected by powerful curses invoked by priests to deter grave robbers. Imagine an ancient thief, driven by greed, breaking into a pharaoh's burial chamber. He might steal a golden amulet, only to find his family suddenly plagued by illness, his crops failing, or his wealth mysteriously vanishing. He would quickly attribute this to the desecrated tomb and the angry spirit of the pharaoh, now channeled through the stolen object. The object itself becomes a vessel of retribution. Then there are the more deliberate magical curses, often associated with practitioners of dark arts. A sorcerer, seeking to harm an enemy, might imbue an ordinary object, a piece of clothing, a personal belonging, or even a small effigy, with negative energy through ritual. This object, now a cursed conduit, would then be subtly placed in the victim's possession or their home. Imagine a rival finding a seemingly harmless feather on their pillow, only for their fortunes to swiftly decline, their health to fail, and their mind to become tormented. The mundane object transforms into a terrifying weapon, poisoning their life from within. Historians and folklorists often note that the belief in cursed objects served as a powerful explanatory framework for otherwise inexplicable misfortunes, providing a tangible culprit for bad luck in a world lacking scientific understanding of disease. Accidents or economic downturns. This highlights the psychological utility of such beliefs. A particularly insidious aspect of cursed objects was their perceived ability to blight various facets of life. They could cause illness, a mysterious wasting sickness, chronic pain, or mental instability. They could bring about financial ruin, businesses failing, crops withering, wealth inexplicably disappearing. They could destroy relationships, causing discord in families, driving lovers apart, or alienating friends. The cursed object was not specific in its malice, it was a general spreader of misfortune, a silent agent of chaos. You might even hear tales of objects carrying the residual anger or suffering of their previous owners. Especially if those owners died tragically or unjustly. A piece of jewelry worn by a murder victim, for instance, might be believed to carry the ghost of their suffering, inflicting emotional distress or bad luck on subsequent wearers. This suggests a lingering spiritual imprint, a form of spiritual contagion passed through physical contact. The ways to detect or counteract cursed objects were often as elaborate and varied as the curses themselves. People might seek out diviners or counter-magicians to identify the source of their misfortune. Rituals of purification, cleansing with holy water, burning certain herbs, or incantations might be performed to break the curse's hold. Sometimes, the only solution was to destroy the object itself, or to bury it deep in the earth, hoping to contain its malevolence forever. Imagine the desperate relief when a family, after years of misfortune, finally identifies the cursed heirloom that they believe has been blighting their lives, one fascinating, though often overlooked. Detail is the concept of taboo objects becoming cursed if misused or mishandled, items from sacred sites, or those associated with powerful deities or spirits, could become potent sources of negative energy if treated disrespectfully. A stolen idol, a desecrated relic, or a forgotten offering could turn on its possessor, bringing down divine or spiritual wrath upon them. This reinforced respect for sacred boundaries and spiritual power. So, as you quietly reflect on the chilling belief in cursed objects, blighted lives, you glimpse a world where inanimate things were far from inert. They were potential vessels of unseen malice, capable of poisoning every aspect of human existence. It's a terrifying reminder of a time when misfortune was not random, but often attributed to a deliberate, insidious supernatural force, carried silently within the very objects we touch and possess. You've explored the insidious nature of cursed objects, silently blighting lives. Now, let's delve into a truly chilling and pervasive fear that stretched across generations, the concept of bloodlines and generational doom. This is about the terrifying belief that a curse, a damnation, or a spiritual blight could be passed down through a family, contaminating an entire lineage for generations, punishing the innocent descendants for the transgressions of their ancestors. Imagine living in a world where you felt the weight of your family's history, not just as a legacy of achievements, but as a potential burden of ancient sins or curses. Your child falls ill mysteriously, your crops fail year after year, or your family consistently faces inexplicable misfortunes. The whispers begin. Is it the family curse? Are we paying for the sins of our forefathers? This wasn't just folklore for many cultures. The idea of a curse clinging to an entire bloodline was a terrifying, concrete reality. The origin of a generational curse could be varied. It might stem from a heinous act committed by an ancestor, a betrayal, a murder, a sacrilege against a deity or a sacred place, or the breaking of a powerful oath. The divine or supernatural retribution for this original sin was believed to cling to the family name, tainting every subsequent generation. Imagine a distant ancestor committing an unspeakable act, and you, centuries later, still bearing the spiritual burden of their transgression. It's a profound sense of inherited guilt and inescapable doom. Consider the biblical concept of the sins of the fathers being visited upon the children, a theme found in various ancient texts, while often interpreted metaphorically today. For many historical societies, this was taken quite literally. A family lineage could be cursed with perpetual poverty, chronic illness, barrenness, madness, or a consistent pattern of tragic deaths. The curse wasn't just an event, it was a condition, a spiritual genetic code that dictated misfortune. Think about the profound psychological impact of this belief. If you suspected your family was under such a curse, every setback, every misfortune, every illness would reinforce that terrifying conviction. It could lead to a pervasive sense of fatalism, a feeling that your destiny was predetermined by forces beyond your control, making effort seem futile. The weight of ancestral sin would be a crushing burden, deeply affecting personal choices, relationships, and the very hope for the future. Historians and anthropologists note that the belief in generational curses often served as a powerful explanatory framework for persistent misfortune in societies without scientific understandings of genetics, epidemiology, or economic cycles. It provided a supernatural reason for otherwise inexplicable patterns of hardship within families, reinforcing communal morality and the consequences of transgression, a particularly disturbing yet compelling. Detail is the common motif of tragic recurring patterns in cursed bloodlines. You might hear tales of cursed families where every eldest son dies young, or every generation sees a specific form of madness, or every marriage ends in heartbreak. These recurring patterns, seemingly defying chance, were seen as irrefutable proof of the curse's grip. A chilling reminder that the ancient malevolence was still actively at work. It's like watching a dark play unfold again and again, with your own family members as the unwitting actors. The fear of generational doom also influenced marriage and alliances. If a family was known to be cursed, others might be hesitant to intermarry with them, fearing that the curse would spread to their own lineage. This could lead to further social isolation for affected families, deepening their sense of being marked and ostracized. It was a societal scar, visible across generations. The only hope for breaking a generational curse often lay in desperate and elaborate rituals. These could involve seeking out powerful spiritual practitioners, performing acts of extreme penance, making large sacrifices, or even attempting to locate and rectify the original transgression of the ancestor. Imagine the desperate quest of a family, centuries removed from the original sin, trying to uncover and undo a long-forgotten wrong, hoping to finally bring peace to their cursed bloodline. It was a monumental undertaking, driven by existential dread. The concept of bad blood or tainted lineage also plays into this. Beyond explicit curses, some families might simply be viewed with suspicion, their misfortunes attributed to an inherent moral failing or an unquantifiable spiritual blight passed down through their veins. This could lead to a form of subtle, yet pervasive, discrimination, impacting social standing, opportunities, and the general perception of the family within the community. You might even find historical legal systems or social codes that implicitly or explicitly acknowledge the concept of collective or inherited guilt, though often in secular forms. By punishing entire families for the crimes of an individual, while not directly supernatural, this mirrors the underlying logic of generational curses. So, as you quietly reflect on the chilling idea of bloodlines and generational doom, you gain a profound understanding of how deeply the fear of damnation permeated ancient societies. It wasn't just about individual fate. It was about the terrifying thought that the actions of the long dead could reach across centuries, blighting the innocent and condemning an entire lineage to a horrifying, inescapable destiny. You've explored the chilling concept of generational doom, where curses cling to entire bloodlines. Now, let's turn our attention to the desperate hope that flickered in the face of such profound fear, the historical and ritualistic attempts to break the chains of damnation and curses, to reverse their malevolent effects, or at least to mitigate their power. This wasn't about simply wishing bad luck away. It involved elaborate ceremonies, desperate appeals, and often immense personal sacrifice, all in the desperate hope of spiritual liberation. Imagine living under the perceived shadow of a curse, divine or mortal, or fearing for your soul's damnation. The psychological burden would be immense, driving you to seek any possible remedy, This led to a rich tapestry of counter-rituals, purification ceremonies, and appeals to benevolent powers, all designed to unbind the curse and restore spiritual harmony. One common approach involved exorcism or purification rituals. If a person, a place, or an object was believed to be cursed or possessed by a malevolent spirit, a specialist, a priest, shaman, or folk practitioner would be called upon. You might witness a ceremony involving chanting, prayers, the burning of specific herbs, the use of holy water or consecrated salt, and specific gestures designed to drive away the negative energy or entity. Imagine the tension in the room, the desperate hope in the eyes of the afflicted, as the ritual reached its climax, aiming to literally expel the spiritual malady for those facing damnation by the church. The path to breaking the chains was through repentance and absolution. As we discussed earlier, this involved intense confession, public penance like pilgrimages or public humiliation, and a sincere commitment to amend one's life. The hope was that through genuine contrition, divine mercy could be invoked, lifting the spiritual condemnation and restoring the soul's path to salvation. This was a long, arduous spiritual battle fought on very personal and public fronts. Then there were attempts to directly reverse the curse on a magical level, if a curse tablet was found. Counter-magicians might attempt to create a counter-curse tablet, invoking benevolent deities or spirits to undo the malevolent spell. Sometimes, a curse object might be ritually destroyed, buried in a different manner, or purified with sacred elements, in the belief that severing its physical connection would also sever its spiritual power. Imagine the careful, precise movements of a counter-magician, meticulously working to untangle the invisible threads of a malicious spell. Scholars of magic and religion generally distinguish between proactive, magical attempts to reverse curses and reactive religious approaches focused on repentance and divine intervention, though historical practices often blended elements of both. This distinction highlights the varied strategies people employed based on their belief systems. A particularly poignant, often overlooked, detail involved appealing to the original source of the curse. If a curse was believed to stem from a wronged individual or a desecrated ancestor, desperate measures might be taken to make amends. This could involve seeking out the descendants of the wronged party to offer restitution, or performing belated funerary rites for a neglected ancestor, all in the hope that appeasing the original source of grievance would lift the curse from the lineage. It was a search for historical justice, believed to have supernatural consequences. In some cultures, blood sacrifice or votive offerings were used as desperate attempts to appease angered deities and break powerful divine curses. This wasn't casual. It was often a profound and costly act, offering something deeply valuable in exchange for divine mercy. Imagine the solemnity and fear surrounding such a ritual, the hope that the magnitude of the offering would be enough to break the chain of misfortune for generational curses. The rituals could be even more complex, involving multiple family members and stretching over prolonged periods. This might include specific purification baths, communal prayers, or even rituals to symbolically sever the cursed link in the family line. Perhaps through naming conventions or symbolic acts of separation. The goal was to spiritually cleanse the entire bloodline, to protect future generations from the burden of ancestral sins. It's like performing spiritual surgery on an entire family tree. The effectiveness of these attempts to break the chains was, of course, a matter of belief. For those who genuinely believed, the success of a ritual could bring immense psychological relief, a feeling of liberation from an unbearable spiritual weight. Even if misfortunes continued, the very act of trying, of fighting against the perceived doom, could provide a sense of agency and hope. You might find historical anecdotes of individuals who claim to have successfully broken a curse or lifted damnation, their stories becoming powerful testaments to the triumph of faith or magic. These narratives would serve to reinforce the belief in the possibility of redemption and the power of specific rituals, offering a glimmer of hope in a world otherwise shadowed by supernatural dread. So, as you quietly reflect on the desperate attempts to break the chains of damnation and curses, you glimpse a profound aspect of human resilience. Faced with terrifying threats to their souls and their lives, ancient peoples devised elaborate rituals and undertook immense sacrifices, all in the enduring hope of spiritual liberation, a constant battle against the unseen forces of malevolence. You've explored the desperate attempts to break curses and escape damnation through ritual. Now, let's fast forward to a pivotal shift in human thought, how rational thought began to challenge belief in curses. This isn't about definitively disproving every ancient superstition, but about the slow, persistent emergence of scientific inquiry and critical thinking that offered alternative explanations for misfortune, gradually eroding the literal terror once associated with curses and damnation. Imagine yourself in a bustling city in the 17th or 18th century. The Age of Enlightenment beginning to dawn across Europe. The towering cathedrals still stand, and many people still believe in divine judgment. But a new way of thinking is taking hold, one that emphasizes observation, reason, and empirical evidence. When crops fail, people increasingly ask, is it a curse? Or is it bad weather, poor soil, or pestilence when illness strikes? Is it demonic possession? Or is it a contagion? A biological process? This shift was profound, gradually pulling the rug out from under the feet of literal belief in curses. One of the most significant challenges to the power of curses came from the rise of medical science. As physicians and anatomists began to study the human body, understanding disease as a biological phenomenon rather than a spiritual affliction, the concept of a cursed illness began to crumble, when a fever could be attributed to infection, or wasting sickness to malnutrition. The need for supernatural explanations diminished. You could now consult a doctor, not just a priest or a witch doctor, for your ailments. This gave people a new sense of agency over their health, removing it from the realm of unpredictable magical malevolence. Consider the early, painstaking work of epidemiologists. When a plague swept through a town, instead of simply blaming divine wrath or a witch's curse, people slowly began to observe patterns how the disease spread, who was affected, and what environmental factors seemed to play a role, while it took centuries for germ theory to fully develop. These early observations laid the groundwork for a more rational understanding of epidemics, moving them from the realm of spiritual judgment to observable, manageable phenomena. Historians of science often point out that the transition from magical Saki's supernatural explanations to scientific ones was rarely a clean break, but a gradual process where new scientific understanding often coexisted with, or was adapted into, older folk beliefs for a considerable period. This highlights the complex way societies integrate new knowledge. The development of natural philosophy, the precursor to modern science, also played a crucial role. Thinkers like Isaac Newton, challenging ancient notions of the universe, showed that the cosmos operated according to predictable, observable laws, not just the whims of deities or the malice of sorcerers. This shift towards a mechanistic worldview, where events had discernible causes and effects, left less room for arbitrary curses to simply wreak havoc without explanation. You could measure, calculate, and predict. Rather than just fear, a particularly humorous, yet revealing. Detail of this transition comes from the skepticism sometimes shown by even religious authorities towards certain miracles or curses, as the church itself became more institutionalized and rationalized. Some clergy grew wary of blatant claims of curses, fearing they might undermine true faith or be used for fraudulent purposes. They often demanded rigorous proof, a form of early skepticism, before acknowledging supernatural phenomena, inadvertently contributing to a more rational outlook. The rise of legal systems based on evidence and logic also challenged the concept of curses. In a court of law, you couldn't simply accuse someone of cursing you without tangible proof. while trials for witchcraft and sorcery still occurred. The burden of proof, however flawed, slowly shifted from popular belief to observable evidence. This secularization of justice meant that people increasingly looked to human laws for protection and retribution. Rather than relying solely on supernatural means, the widespread adoption of literacy and the printing press also contributed to this shift. As knowledge became more widely accessible, people could read alternative explanations for misfortune, access different philosophical viewpoints, and critically compare traditional beliefs. This intellectual ferment eroded the monopoly on knowledge that had sustained many older superstitions. You could read a pamphlet explaining crop rotation, rather than solely relying on prayers to avert a curse. However, it's important to remember that this was a slow process, even as scientific understanding advanced. Old beliefs died hard. For centuries, scientific explanations and superstitious fears coexisted, sometimes uncomfortably. A farmer might use new agricultural techniques and still hang charms in his barn to ward off evil. The human mind is complex, and the desire for supernatural explanations, particularly for the truly inexplicable, remained potent. So, as you quietly reflect on the gradual triumph of rational thought over ancient fears, you see a fundamental change in humanity's relationship with misfortune. While the dread of damnation and curses once held absolute sway, the steady march of scientific inquiry began to challenge those brutal beliefs, offering alternative explanations and slowly, painstakingly, breaking the psychological chains that had bound generations. It was a liberation of the mind, a quiet revolution that continues to shape our understanding of the world. You've explored how rational thought began to chip away at the literal belief in curses and damnation. Yet, even in our highly technological and secular world, those ancient fears rarely vanish completely. Instead, they transform, subtly influencing our anxieties and manifesting as modern manifestations of fear. This is about how the deep-seated dread of eternal condemnation and inescapable curses, stripped of their overt supernatural trappings, still shapes our psychological landscape, albeit in new and often unexpected ways. Imagine yourself scrolling through social media or watching the news. You might not believe in a literal hell with fire and brimstone, but the fear of public shaming and social exclusion can feel remarkably similar to medieval damnation. When someone is canceled, their reputation destroyed, their career ruined, and their name dragged through the digital mud, it's a secularized form of anathema, the public condemnation, the ostracization by peers, the widespread judgment. It taps into that primal human fear of being cast out from the tribe, utterly alone and without recourse. This is a very real, very tangible modern hell for some. Consider the pervasive anxiety around legacy and reputation. We might not worry about our souls being damned, but we worry intensely about how we will be remembered, or if our mistakes will permanently stain our names. The fear of historical judgment, of being on the wrong side of history, or of having our achievements overshadowed by a single transgression, echoes the ancient fear of a permanent, negative mark on our existence. It's a form of secular damnation, where history itself becomes the unforgiving judge. Then there's the modern equivalent of the generational curse, the fear of inherited trauma, intergenerational poverty, or systemic disadvantage. While understood through sociological and psychological lenses, the concept that the struggles of ancestors can profoundly impact the lives of descendants resonates deeply with the old belief that the sins or misfortunes of a bloodline could be passed down. You might not call it a curse, but the feeling of being burdened by circumstances beyond your control, rooted in your family's past, evokes a similar sense of inescapable doom. It's a curse of circumstance rather than spirit, but its impact is undeniably real. Psychologists and sociologists frequently analyze how historical religious fears, even when secularized, continue to influence collective anxieties about moral purity, social judgment, and the consequences of perceived transgression in contemporary society. This highlights the enduring human need for meaning and justice, even when framed differently. A particularly insidious modern manifestation is the fear of digital footprints and permanent records. In the medieval world, anathema meant your name was struck from the book of life. Today, every mistake, every controversial statement, every moment of weakness can be digitally recorded and retrieved instantly, permanently accessible. The fear that a youthful indiscretion or a misguided opinion could be unearthed years later to blight your career or reputation is a pervasive modern anxiety. It's a secularized, inescapable judgment, recorded for eternity in the digital realm. It's like a permanent, searchable curse tablet. The belief in bad luck, or jinxes, still persists. Even among those who claim to be rational, we might dismiss it as superstition. But how many people still avoid walking under ladders, breaking mirrors, or stepping on cracks? Just in case this lingering. Low-level anxiety about unseen forces bringing misfortune, even without a specific religious context, is a direct echo of the ancient fear of localized curses or malevolent influences. It's a playful version of the terror, but the underlying mechanism is recognizable. You might also see echoes in our fascination with conspiracy theories. When something goes wrong on a grand scale, a political scandal, an economic collapse, a widespread disaster, there's often a deep-seated human need to find a single malevolent source, a deliberate curse orchestrated by unseen forces. This offers a sense of control, a tangible enemy to blame. Much like ancient peoples blamed an angry god or a sorcerer's spell for their misfortunes, it's a modern way of making sense of chaos, even if it replaces one irrational belief with another. The language of damnation and curses also pervades our everyday speech. Often unconsciously, we talk about damned good or cursed luck. We might say, "I'm cursed with this terrible habit." These linguistic vestiges show how deeply ingrained these concepts are in our collective consciousness, even when we don't literally believe in their supernatural origins. So, as you reflect on these modern manifestations of fear, you realize that the brutal history of damnation and eternal curses is far from over. It has simply transformed, shedding its medieval robes but retaining its chilling essence. The ancient anxieties about being condemned, cast out, or eternally blighted still resonate, shaping our social interactions, our public discourse, and the quiet fears that sometimes whisper in the back of our minds. A timeless echo of humanity's persistent dread. You've explored how the historical fear of spiritual exclusion subtly echoes in our modern anxieties about belonging and social judgment. Now, as our journey through the chilling power of excommunication draws to a gentle close, let's consider the unbroken thread of faith and the profound, enduring power of belonging that it represents. Juxtaposed with the quiet dread of being utterly cast out, a theme that resonates across all human experience. Imagine, one final time, the medieval believer. Their world was ordered, their place within it defined by their relationship with the church. Faith was not just a personal conviction, it was a communal reality, a shared spiritual landscape that provided meaning, comfort, and the promise of salvation. The very act of belonging to the Christian community meant you were part of something vast, ancient, and eternal. This sense of belonging was immensely powerful, a foundational element of individual and collective identity. The dread of excommunication, then, was the ultimate threat to this belonging. To be cast out was not merely to be shunned, it was to be spiritually dislocated, stripped of your place in the divine order, and left adrift in a terrifying void. This profound sense of spiritual homelessness, this utter severance from the source of grace and communal solace, was what made the punishment so unspeakably awful. It's the ultimate opposite of belonging. Think about the innate human need for connection. From our earliest tribal ancestors to our complex modern societies, we are fundamentally social creatures. We crave acceptance, recognition, and a shared sense of purpose. The church, in its medieval manifestation, provided this in abundance, knitting together individuals into a vast spiritual family. Excommunication was the brutal unraveling of that fabric, isolating the individual in a way that few other punishments could achieve. The very rituals of excommunication, with their symbolic extinguishing of lights and tolling of bells, were designed to visually and audibly represent this severance. You weren't just told you were out, you were shown it. Your senses assaulted by the stark reality of your exclusion. This made the dread palpable, a physical sensation mirroring the spiritual void. Sociological studies on religious communities often highlight how the sense of belonging within a faith group can be a significant predictor of well-being. And conversely, how ostracization from such a group can lead to severe psychological distress, reinforcing the historical impact of excommunication. This psychological consistency across time is a powerful testament to the human need for inclusion, a subtle yet persistent echo of this dread of being cast out can be seen in our own anxieties today about moral purity and social acceptance. While the context is secular, the fear of being seen as unfit, unworthy, or beyond redemption by our peers or society at large still holds immense power. We might not fear hellfire, but we fear social isolation, public disgrace, and the loss of our standing within our chosen communities. The underlying vulnerability is the same. Conversely, the act of reconciliation, however arduous, was so profoundly sought after because it represented the restoration of that precious belonging, to be welcomed back into the community, to once again partake in the sacraments, to feel the embrace of shared faith. This was the ultimate antidote to the dread of exclusion. It highlights the deeply restorative power of forgiveness and acceptance, the historical trajectory of excommunication, from its ultimate power in the Middle Ages to its diminished, more nuanced role today, tells a story about the changing nature of authority and belief. Yet, the core human drama remains. It is the story of individuals caught between the desire for spiritual truth and the demands of earthly power. Between the comfort of belonging and the terror of being cast out, you can almost feel the quiet yearning for connection, the deep-seated desire to be part of something larger than oneself. That drove medieval individuals to immense acts of penance, and you can feel the cold dread of being entirely alone, spiritually adrift, this unbroken thread of faith. And the fear of its severance is a powerful, timeless narrative that continues to whisper through the annals of history. So, as the last echoes of bells and solemn pronouncements fade, let your mind become calm and still. The journey through the disturbing power of excommunication has shown us how deeply intertwined our spiritual beliefs are with our social lives, and how potent the fear of being truly cast out can be. Now, let those thoughts drift away, like gentle smoke into the night sky, leaving you with a profound sense of peace and the quiet comfort of your own presence. Dim the lights even further and let the soft hum of the fan lull you into a deep, untroubled sleep.